guys, it's Kelly here again and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another bookish related video. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my ranking for the books that I read in the year 2021. This is technically gonna be like a tier ranking because I've separated them into 6 different categories, but I won't do it on those tier ranking websites because I don't really like the visuals, so I'm gonna just create my own graphic. So I've divided them into 6 different tiers, starting with the worst one, which I named Hated It. And these are books that I absolutely hated last year. And I'm just gonna be brief with this one because I don't have any. I didn't have a book that actually made me angry and that I actually hated. So this tier is gonna remain empty. The second worst tier is going to be the most disappointing books, and these are not ones that I hated. I still had elements that I enjoyed in these books, but I was either disappointed or something bugged me a lot that I couldn't justify putting it up. The next tier is going to be not great, not terrible. These are books that I didn't quite enjoy, but didn't really hate, so they're just kind of middle towards the worst part. Tier number 3 is going to be enjoyable reads. Didn't make it to my favorites list, but still had a good time and a good experience reading them. In the second place are going to be books that I loved and really enjoyed, and in first place are going to be the phenomenal books that practically made it into my favorites. So I'm just gonna go chronologically in the order that I read the books, and if you want to hear more thoughts about them, I have 2 wrap-ups on my channel for all of the books that I'm going to be mentioning, except I think 1, and I won't go into too much detail. I will just say a few sentences and place them in a tier. So the first book that I finished in the year 2021 was Aurora Rising, and for me this is a book that goes into the second tier, which is Loved It. I had some issues with it, but I really enjoyed it overall, so it goes into my second place. The next book that I read was The Song of Achilles, which was a DNF at around 60% for me. This one goes into my 5th tier, which is disappointing. The Outpost was the third book that I read, and it goes into the second tier. I enjoyed it a lot. I was debating whether I should put it in first or in second, but there were a few things that I kind of had an issue with, so it goes into second. I forget to mention, Aurora Rising was a 4-star for me, the Song of Achilles was 2 stars, and the Outpost was 4 stars again. The next book is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and even though this was a 4-star read for me, I would put it enjoyment-wise in the 3rd tier, because I did enjoy it, but I have a lot of issues with it. So even though it was a 4-star, just like Aurora Rising and the Outpost, it goes a tier down because star ratings are not always that accurate. Next up was Walking to Aldebaran, which was a 2-star read for me, and this one goes into the not great, not terrible tier. Next up is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is again a 2-star read for me, and unfortunately it goes into tier 5, which was quite disappointing. I really disliked how I felt about the book, but I did like the concept and I did like the overall way it was written. It's just no. Next up is Flowers for Algernon, which was a 4-star read for me, and it goes into tier 2, which was Loved It. Every Heart a Doorway was a 3-star read for me, and it goes into tier 3, which was enjoyable. Enchantment of Ravens was a 2-star read for me, and unfortunately it goes into the 4th tier, which is not great but not terrible. The Midnight Library was a 5-star, but it goes into tier 2, which was Loved It, but not enough to deem it as a phenomenal book. But it is one that kind of resonated on a personal level, so it was a great read and I definitely recommend it. Get a Life, Chloe Brown was 3 stars, and it also goes into tier 4, which was not great, not terrible. Next up is Raybearer, which was a 5-star read for me, and I think it was my favorite book of the year, so it wasn't hard for me to just put it in tier 1, which is a phenomenal read. The next book was The Memory Thief, which was a 2 stars and a DNF for me, so it goes into tier 5, which was quite disappointing. Charles Bukowski's On Cats was a 3-star, and it's in tier 4, which is not great, not terrible. Another 5-star for me was Recursion, and this one also goes into phenomenal read. A 4-star read was Kindred, and I put that in tier 2 because I loved it. I Am Legend was a 3 stars, but it was very enjoyable, so it goes into the 3rd category, which I quite enjoyed. Another one in tier 3 was Living with Matsunaga-san, and this one was, I think, a 3 stars. Yeah, it was a 3 stars for me, and it was enjoyable. I was debating whether I should put it in not great, not terrible, but it was really enjoyable. I was very hooked, so it goes into tier 3. Murder in Mesopotamia was a 4-star read for me, but it was so well written that I just have to put it in tier 1, which was phenomenal read. Middle West was a 4-star, but I loved it so much that it was just a phenomenal read for me, so tier 1. Harleen was 3 stars, and it's not great, it's not terrible, so tier 4. Anxious People was a 3-star for me, and it's also in 3rd tier, which was enjoyable. And the last book of the year that I read is kind of an ironic one. I haven't spoken about it on this channel yet, and it was Redemptor, which was the second and final book to the Rare Bear series. And I read this right at the end of the year, and I just couldn't wait. At the end of the year, I wanted to focus on books that I've started but hadn't finished, but I just couldn't wait, so I had to read it. So the first part in the series was a phenomenal read, and it was in tier 1. However, the second and final installment was just so disappointing, and I put it in tier 5. Now, because I haven't spoken about it, I will just mention a few things that bothered me a lot, and I will probably do a more detailed description in my next wrap-up, maybe in March. So for Redemptor, I went into it expecting to be a middle book. I thought that it was going to be the second in a 3-part series, and as I got to the end, and don't get me wrong, it read completely like a middle book. There was so little going on and so much expanding on other things rather than the main story. I really did think right up until the end that this was going to be the second book and we're going to have a full 3rd book. So I wasn't judging it too harshly, but once I got to the end and I realized that this is the end, I started judging it so harshly. So I really disliked the way that this book was handled. There were nice ideas, the ending was wrapped up in a nice little bow, but everything that happened up until then was just... what? We have so very little of what we had in book 1. Even the characters aren't there. You just have a slew of new characters. You don't even get to communicate too much with them. You don't get to see them very much. And the ending was like 20-30 pages, and it felt so rushed, but at the same time so little happened that I don't even want to say that it was rushed. Rushed just doesn't seem like the right word for it. So incredibly disappointed. So I would really recommend book 1. It was really great, and I loved the experience of it. I mean, I put it in my first year, and it was practically my favorite book of the year. But just if you go into it, keep in mind that you're probably not gonna read book 2, or maybe you shouldn't read book 2 so you don't spoil your enjoyment from book 1. But even though I hated the last book in the series, I still think that the first book is worth the read. It was in my phenomenal tier, and I also think that it's one of my favorite books that I read that year. So if you want to read it, I definitely recommend it. Just keep in mind that the second book might not be up to anyone's standards, basically. So that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, and if you've read any of the books, I would love to hear in the comment section down below what you thought of them and what you think of the tier ranking that I did on the books that I read. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!